I know you guys are specialists in aquatics engineering. Could you tell me a little more about that? That seems really specialized, but it seems like, everyone has pools or aquatics. Like, what goes into that, and how did you carve yourself that niche?
I was just online one day and had this cold call, kind of a LinkedIn message that popped up. And it was this high school student, actually here at one of the local high schools. Well, her dad is the owner of one of the larger commercial swimming pool contractors here in the DFW. And through the conversation, he knew that I had an engineering firm, and he just asked me, said, "Hey, do you guys design swimming pools?"
Structural engineering opportunities aren't limited to just tall buildings. Some of the most complex and rewarding work is happening in aquatics. It's a market full of complexity, risk, and design nuance that many engineers overlook. In this episode, we're joined by Daniel McCaulley, PE, founder and principal of Ultimus Engineering, to talk about how engineers can carve out a niche in specialized markets like aquatics, and why building strong client relationships is just as critical as delivering precise designs. If you're a structural engineer aiming to grow your leadership, build trust, and think beyond code compliance, this episode has insights you won't want to miss. Before we jump in, I wanted to tell you about our AEC PM Connect event, designed for structural engineers who want to lead more effectively, with sessions on AI in project management, earned value tracking, and people leadership. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey, with more coming.
I am your co-host, Alex Datto.
I'm your co-host, Matt McCaulley, and this is the Structural Engineering Channel.
Daniel, can you share a bit about your background and the path that led you to founding Ultimus Engineering?
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. It's really kind of a cool story, and I sort of like to tell it that the idea for this started probably 35 years ago. So I was one of these kids that came from a single parent, single child household. So my mom was always just finding all the ways she could to get me out of the house. And a big part of that was sports. And so I was always involved in every sport under the sun. I even went to college to play football. But the important part of that story is essentially that competition was the single driving force behind everything I did. And so it didn't matter if it was athletic related or academic related, or we're sitting at a restaurant and someone says, "Hey, I bet you can't eat 50 chicken nuggets faster than that guy." It's like, well, how much money do you want to lose? And so when I got into school, I knew I was going to play football, didn't know what I wanted to study, but I was just like, well, for the sake of competition, let's just pick the most difficult thing I can think of. And essentially that was either engineering or med school. Med school takes too long. And so I was like, well, engineering seems like a respectable fallback. So I went into mechanical engineering, got my degree in mechanical engineering, a bachelor's degree, and I went to go work actually in the oil and gas industry. And what I discovered there, or what I was presented with, was essentially this idea of third-party engineering. So companies, even with their own engineering firms, hiring other engineers to supplement their work. And I was exposed to this aspect of it as well, but engineers generally aren't great communicators. They're very technically sound. They're very good in their craft. They focus on whatever that craft is and they become experts at it. And that's what we generally need engineers to do. But essentially what I found was that these third-party engineers, and even the engineers that I worked with, it was tough sometimes to get them to look at other ideas, to consider other ways of looking at things. And as I developed in my professional career and I moved away from being a staff engineer into some leadership roles, and I was responsible for hiring engineers, the idea of that was just more and more compounded. And it kind of came to a point where in my life and my career where I was ready to take that next challenge, right, which was ultimately starting this company. But I wanted to do it in a way where we would present a technical offering as a third-party engineering resource, but do it from a standpoint where we could build relationships through better communication. You can walk down the street and you can find any number of structural or NEP or whatever kind of engineering firm you want to, but finding someone that you enjoy working with, that you enjoy communicating with, and that isn't just that quote unquote technical expert who sits in a cubicle and doesn't do anything all day except crunch numbers, that's a special kind of person. And so really what brought this company about was the idea that everybody needs engineering. Everything is engineered. It doesn't matter if it's buildings or food or anything else. it's all engineered. And so we need engineers to support those endeavors, but it's nice to have an engineer you can talk to. And so essentially that's what ultimately brought the company along. It was just this education and background and this corporate career of, I say, put it again in air quotes, dealing with engineers, but wanting to have an offering to bring to the public where it's not just going out and getting a professional engineer, but it's working with an organization from the standpoint of being someone you're happy to work with.
Well, that's a good path, a good, I guess, approach to opening up a new engineering business. I'm sure it's going very well.
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun doing it. It's certainly not without its ups and downs, and it wasn't just, hey, wake up one day, I'm going to start an engineering firm. We're everyone's friend, right? There were several steps along the way to get there, and every company has its own mission. Every company has its own ideals, and starting a company is not easy. It doesn't matter if you're buying a franchise, a Chick-fil-A franchise where you've got a massive following. There's always going to be ups and downs, and so it wasn't quite that easy. But it's understanding what that process is and then trusting the process to get there.
Wow, what pushed you over the ledge to take the leap?
Really, honestly, it was COVID and that thing that happened, right? I was sitting there one day. It was early COVID. It was probably March, April, something like that. And it's a big question for everybody, right? It's what is going to happen. Nobody knows. Nobody still really knows. I think we feel a little bit generally better about it now, but it was kind of one of those things. It's like, look, this is going to go one of two ways. Either one, it's going to go horribly wrong, which hopefully, didn't happen, and obviously didn't. But the other option is we're going to get something out of this. We're going to have a new lease on life, if you will. So what is the opportunity that we can make out of this? Do I want to go back and sit in my cubicle? Do I want to go back and continue to live someone else's dream? Or again, circling everything back to that just innate desire for challenge and competition and find something difficult and just go do it. And it was just kind of all those different factors and everything I was thinking about and praying over it. And really just one day I decided, hey, if I'm going to do something different with my life, if I'm going to make something not only for myself, but for my young family, is there a better way to do it than what I'm doing now? And I talked with some people, talked with some industry colleagues. I found a mentor who had been through this before and ultimately decided, hey, listen, if I'm going to do something, let's do it. I'm going to give myself a runway. At the end of the runway, it's either going to work or it's not. And here we are a little over 4.5 years later, and things are going well.
That's just awesome.
Yeah, that's a big leap too, right? I remember one of my mentors is he owns his own firm and everything too, and like his story was he tried to get as many people to discourage him from doing it. Like, give me all the things that can go wrong, all the things that like the low levels of success. 90% of businesses fail, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, after hearing all of that, and he still wanted to do it, that's when you know that you should do it. It's like you see all the bad things, all the risks that can happen. But if you see all of it, you're going in with open eyes, and then that's when you can. I think your chances. He was telling me his chances go up because now he knows all the things to watch out for, all the things that can go wrong, and when they do, you're not caught super blindsided. So it takes a different kind of mindset to go into that instead of just saying like, oh yeah, this looks fun, let's do it.
That's a very bold strategy. I commend him highly for taking that strategy. I was more on the other side of the fence, like, okay, well, how well can this go? Third-party engineering is a $250 billion a year industry. Like, give me 1% of 1% of that. You can look at it from what are all the things that can go horribly wrong, so I'm prepared. Yeah, high compliments to taking that strategy. I'm not sure that I would want to know all I'm sure there's still things that I don't know that can go wrong. We've certainly overcome our challenges. But yeah, very interesting way of thinking about things.
And yeah, you were mentioning also the, carving out that niche. I know you guys are specialists in aquatics engineering. Could you tell me a little more about that? That seems really specialized, but it seems like, everyone has pools or aquatics. Like, what goes into that, and how did you carve yourself that niche?
Sure. So it's kind of a cool story how that came about. I was just online one day and had this cold call, kind of a LinkedIn message that popped up. And it was this high school student, actually here at one of the local high schools. And this 16-year-old young lady, I guess, call her at that point, a junior in high school, needed to interview an industry professional. She was interested in being a mechanical engineer when she went to college. And I was just like, first of all, when I was 16, I wasn't worried about being an engineer, at least not to the point of wanting to interview an industry professional. But we had this really great talk and just talked about career choices and what opportunities were in front of her. And then a couple of weeks later, she reached out again and said, well, plot twist, what I really need is a mentor to guide me through this year-long curriculum. I've got to come up with an independent course of study. Think of it as a thesis, if you will. Would you mind being my mentor? I interviewed several engineers and I had a great connection with you. And obviously I couldn't sign up fast enough. So we went through this really great program, got to the end. She had a fantastic presentation. And where I'm going with the story essentially is that I had an opportunity to finally meet her parents. Well, her dad is the owner of one of the larger commercial swimming pool contractors here in the DFW. And through the conversation, he knew that I had an engineering firm, and he just asked me, said, hey, do you guys design swimming pools? And I said, well, we use structural engineering, so we work with concrete, and we do MEP engineering, so we understand plumbing and equipment selection. Seems like a reasonable enough thing to meld together. We don't have experience in it, but what you got? So anyway, so we were through a couple of projects together, and essentially what he informed me was that the lead times that he was getting on projects from Aquatics Engineering, which is largely structural, but there is certainly the mechanical and plumbing pieces of it as well. He was losing almost 40% of his projects just because he couldn't get drawing specs fast enough. And what we were able to do was reduce his lead time by about 70% on his projects. And he told me, he said, look, if you can keep this up, you've got 100% of my business today. We won't make any other phone calls. And that was the first step into the aquatics engineering, which today is now a third of our business. And we do a really good job keeping everything roughly in thirds between the MEP, the aquatics, and the structural components. But you're right. The aquatics piece of it is very niche. And I think a big piece of that is because there's not a degree in aquatics engineering. There's lots of supplementary education and courses and curriculum and certifications you can receive, but you don't walk down the street to Berkeley or Georgia Tech or MIT and say, I want to be an aquatics engineer. Most of what we find in the industry is actually licensed structural PEs that end up in aquatics engineering firms to serve as the principal or at least the final reviewer of those aquatics projects. And the mechanical and plumbing components of it are, I wouldn't say terribly complex. There's certainly a lot of nuances that go into making appropriate equipment selection, sizing plumbing, but structural engineers have more codes and more books and more everything else than any other discipline. So the extra 57 pages or something like that of the IVC that is related directly to the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code is a drop in the bucket, if that. But it's really interesting because essentially what you're doing is you're designing a vessel, ideally to be watertight. You know, concrete is not a perfect surface, but with the plaster and the other pieces that go into that, essentially you're designing a glorified retaining wall that has some plumbing systems that allow that water to recirculate. And that is the most drastic oversimplification I can possibly provide. And we can certainly get into some more of the details. But I think it's great for everyone listening today just to understand that aquatics engineering is a very critical subset of structural engineering largely. The engineers who review and stamp those drawings virtually across the board are licensed structural engineers. And that's because of the criticality of not only the systems directly pertaining to the concrete design of the pools, but virtually every swimming pool, unless we're talking about high-rise applications, which is another conversation. You're dealing with geotechs, you're dealing with other components structurally, either with buildings or in close proximity to existing foundations. So the soil components and understanding the geotechs and the bearing capacity of soil, not every pool is just dug straight in the ground. A lot of them have to be put on piers, depending on where you are geographically in the country. Here in North Texas, where we're headquarters, we have notoriously some of the worst soil conditions in the nation. There's a suburb of Dallas where we are called Las Colinas, and we frequently see geotech reports come back with 8, 9, 10, 12 inches of potential soil movement that we have to work around. We've done swimming pools that have been put on 24 and 36 inch void boxes with piers that go down 30 to 40 feet just to support some of these pool structures. So It's more complicated than, hey, let's dig a hole, let's put in some rebar and shoot some concrete. But it is niche, but it's a really big industry, and honestly, it's vastly undersupported. There are some just incredible lead times out there on some of these aquatics projects, and certainly it is due to some complexity. But even a standard 15 by 40 hospitality swimming pool, we see some 6, 8, 10-week lead times from some people in the industry. And it's really just because there aren't enough people with the experience. And then you take one step further, enough people with the experience with that PE stamp that's then required for all of the city permits, because commercial swimming pools have to have their own permit and their own set of construction drawings. They're not looped in with the typical building permit. So yeah, having that specificity is a vastly underrepresented, I will call it, engineering discipline or subdiscipline of structural.
Yeah, you mentioned soil, that some of the soil differential or the soil movement. What other, I guess, what's another typical challenge that maybe engineers, typical engineers that don't work in pool design or aquatics design, what other challenges come up that we may not think of as typical engineers?
Yeah, for sure. So think about this. So let's say, dirt's a lot heavier than water. So you take all the dirt and you replace it essentially with the water that's in the pool. Well, now think about what happens when that pool is empty. Now you have built a boat. Essentially, that's what you've done. You've carted out all the dirt, you've filled it up with concrete, a watertight vessel. So if that soil moves or if you have groundwater potentials, now you have a boat. And boats don't like to sink. Boats like to come out of the ground. So making sure within the design, you're either designing to resist the buoyancy forces, either through a thicker shell, through some kind of keystone or footer that's worked into the pool shell design. Certainly if it's going on piers, you can resist those hydrostatic forces with the design of your piers. But if we're talking about slab on grade pools, hydrostatic forces while the pool is empty is a much bigger piece of the puzzle. And kind of to that point, whenever we're designing the concrete shell, the pool itself, you don't actually design it for when the pool is full, you design it for when it's empty. Another thing to consider is you also have the thermal effects. So just like the way a heat pump works, the ground is always going to be a more average temperature than your air temperature. Well, when that pool's empty, if you have a significant temperature profile between the earth temperature on the backside of the wall and the air temperature on the inside, then all of the thermal properties of causing that, think of it like a fancy retaining wall, you have to be able to resist those forces as well. So you have a really nice, depending on which way you look at it, a really nice toe on the front side where your pool wall curves into the pool bottom, but you don't always have that on the backside extending into the dirt. So again, geographical considerations are important. And again, that goes kind of back into the soils, but it's more than just the bearing capacity or the potential for vertical movement on the soil. There's a number of other things that go into the consideration for when you're designing the thickness of the wall, you're specifying the compressive strength, you're looking at the rebar schedules, how tight, how large, the grade, and then also that depends on some of the different features within the pool as well. Ultra deep pools used for diving or competition, and really anything below 5 feet has a different consideration because now there's even more force of the ground, there's more force of the water. So the varying complexities of different pools where you go to your apartment complex or your maybe a hotel pool, generally those are going to be somewhere between 3.5 to 5 feet deep. That's most of the swimming pools that get built. But when you start talking about, again, certainly getting into the complex features of water parks, lazy rivers, ultra deep pools for 10-meter diving platforms, where those pools can be 12, 15, 18 feet deep. We also work on some other aquatic features for both military and offshore oil rig training. And essentially what they do in those applications is they'll load these trainees into a helicopter, they turn the helicopter upside down and they drop them in the water. Those are large bodies of water that experience some unique forces. Certainly being deep, we put wave simulators in those. It's a really fun industry because you really never know what that next project is going to ask you to do. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, like a 20-foot retaining wall, but then it's a tub. And then you have the sequencing issues and then the buoyancy issues. I can see how that can turn into a whole specialty in and of itself.
It is, and there's people that they make a life out of it, and it's really every project is truly unique. But again, it's similar to buildings or bridges or even single family homes that certainly need structural engineering as well. There are some repetitive concepts. Again, the vast majority of the projects that we design, if they are those typical apartment complexes or hospitality type pools, a lot of the primary structural considerations are similar, but it's redoing those details. And then the beautiful part is for engineers that like to stretch themselves a little bit more, it allows them the opportunity to look at equipment selection, to look at plumbing sizes, even depending on some pools need to be heated or chilled. And so not necessarily saying you need to go back and get a dual degree in mechanical engineering or anything like that, but a good, well-rounded structural engineer can appreciate those concepts. And again, a lot of it is just code-related references. But I think the cool part about the aquatics engineering is it allows for a lot of flexibility where engineers that I see, especially if you're working with a large firm, you can get very pigeonholed in a very specific type of project, a very specific type of calculations. That was one thing that I experienced even as a mechanical engineer early in my career, working in oil and gas, was that 5 years in, I was on the same product line, the same product. I had created my own MathCAD, I created my own Excel, and I could do 2 weeks worth of work in about 6 to 8 hours. And that's great for efficiency. I get a lot of projects out the door. Everyone's patting me on the back. Yeah. But for people that want a little bit more, the aquatics industry gives a really nice option to stretch yourself, to always work on something new. And again, since it is largely underrepresented, I'm not going to call it the Wild West, because there's a lot of really good engineering firms out there that do a really, really good job. And there's certainly lots of code and policies that go into the design. But it is very much, in a lot of cases, up to the aquatics engineer to kind of make some design recommendations. And I think that's one thing that a lot of times structural engineering, you don't always get to do because your projects are very much dictated by the architect. With aquatics engineering, depending on if it's a design build project or something a little bit more complex where there is a lot of forethought that goes into it, we get a lot of projects that come from the architect or from the LA. You've got this beautiful site plan, the buildings are all designed, and then in the courtyard, there's a rectangle with the word pool written in it. All right, well, what do we do with that? And so we get to have a lot of fun from the engineering side, making recommendations and giving feedback to help those architects and help those landscape architects. So it's just nice to be able to kind of scratch that creative itch a little bit more, again, than being just focused on, well, I'm a steel detailer for prefab metal buildings, or all I'm working on is designing, maybe it's luxury high-end residential homes where, yeah, I get some creative solutions, or we do use open web trusses, or we TGI with knockouts on this for different mechanical considerations. So depending on what your interest or what your specificity is, but the aquatics industry, it's a new adventure every day.
I like that a lot because I kind of had the firm I started at did a whole smattering of things, and I did run face first into a pool. It was elevated about 10 feet in the air, and it had a deck cantilevering off the walls, and it was a bit of a learning experience, but I always enjoyed that. And maybe it's a competitive thing, maybe it's an engineering thing, but having something that your mind can really latch onto and work on keeps me engaged a lot better. I think a lot of engineers out there are like that.
Transform your technical experts into impactful leaders with EMI's Engineering Leadership Accelerator. Tailored for AEC professionals, this program enhances communication, delegation, and decision-making skills. Flexible, interactive, and designed to fit your team's schedule. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on corporate training.
But I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning, because you kind of fell into this niche, I guess, by mentorship, which is something we obviously support with this podcast, but through communication. Like you were talking with a high school student and ended up finding out about the dad and then what his needs were and identifying that need and kind of built off of that. So what role do communication skills play in building trust with your clients? What practices have you found effective in turning those relationships into a long-term partnership?
That is the sole basis of our company. Our mission statement is that we create engineering solutions to build better communities. And that's changed a little bit over time. At first, it was just creating solutions to build better companies. but it goes deeper than that. And I think our focus on building communities is an important piece where you can't build communities and you can't create solutions. As an engineer, you can give solutions, but you can't create solutions without that next step, without that communication. And again, I mentioned earlier that all growing up through school and through the early part of my corporate career, engineers generally don't practice soft skills. That's not something that they're innately good at because they're really, really good at math and science and these other technical disciplines. But for us and the engineers that we bring onto our firm, we expect that they almost have a business development type mentality. When they go into a customer meeting or whenever they're having project review meetings or they're doing some, call it wine and dining, if you will, with some of our clients, the idea is that they don't come off as a quote unquote engineer. And there's lots of ways you can help develop that. Even just putting yourself out there and going to networking events. It doesn't even have to be, let's get everybody from every industry together. They can be industry specific events, but getting involved with local chapters, even national chapters of anything from Design Build International to, your just local architecture community, or even go on Meetup and find structural engineers near me, right? Just forcing yourself to have more conversations. But I really believe that the communication aspect, the way that we do business, the way that we put engineers directly in communication with our clients, I feel like that has been our value differentiator that keeps people coming back 72% of the time. Whereas we're not just another engineering firm where you call, you talk to an account manager, they send you to a project manager, your project manager communicates with an engineer, and then it runs back up the chain to the client. But focusing on that soft skill development, both as my general advice to any engineer out there, but it's certainly something that we really push on our internal engineers, is absolutely paramount. And it's not just, hey, I really like talking to that guy, or I really like talking to that gal. It's being able to also appropriately articulate depending on the client that you're talking to, right? Because when we go into conversations with a general contractor, those conversations are very different, even if the subject is the same, than how we would talk to an architect, than how we would talk to a developer, than how we would talk to a vendor or a fellow engineer, right? Because we don't always get the aquatics, the MEP, and the structural on every project. We'd love to, but more often than not, we're collaborating with other engineers. So the way that we structure those conversations and understanding how do we communicate differently with different constituents and being able to be almost chameleon-like, and it's not fake, but it is a purposeful way that we communicate differently with different constituents that all help make up that bigger project.
It's definitely an effective strategy. I think what's something that I focus on in my job is, somebody might say, and I'll put it in terms of your work or the aquatics, is, I need a pool. Well, what do you want to use the pool for? And, how many people are going to be, how often, and start asking a lot of questions. One, to develop the relationship, but two, to really understand what the customer or client's need is going to be. And I think it's one of the best strategies you can have as an engineer to get your customer what they want, but also as a business developer to understand your customer's needs really at the base level. Everybody wants a pool, but why do you want the pool?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And I do want to reiterate for everyone listening what you just said. Asking questions, letting other people respond, letting other people talk. I mean, that's why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? Was we should listen twice as much as we speak. And as engineers, especially licensed professional engineers, oh, buddy, we know everything. We've got that piece of paper. We've got that stamp. We put it on something, and that's the gospel. And that's great. There's a lot of power in that. Someone wise once said, with great power comes great responsibility. And as cliche and as marvel as that is, it's super important. It's super important. And our responsibility, I think, our obligation as engineers is not just to produce a set of drawings that makes a building stand, but our obligation is really to those clients, and it's to those families, and it's to those people that are going to be utilizing, whether it be a water park or a building or a hospital or anything else, or a single family home or an ADU or a carport. It's making sure that that is appropriate for the application. Structural engineers frequently get a bad rap for over-engineering. And again, it's super critical. That thing can't fall down. It can't sink. You don't want it blowing over. But we also have to understand that at some point, someone's paying for this. And it's 98, structural engineering costs ballpark 1% of total construction, sometimes even a lot less than that. So someone's paying for a lot more than just the drawings that we're being paid to do. So being mindful about yes, this is right, but is it too right? And is there ways that, again, Alex, to your point, can we ask questions? Can we most appropriately understand the use? And the more questions we ask, the more we let other people share their stories, the more we can appreciate where they're coming from. And not only does that make for great projects, but it makes for great repeat clients, which as business owners, that's all we can hope for. Referrals are great, but repeat clients and repeat business, it takes 7 times more money to find a client than it does to keep one. So once you do find one, keeping them is of paramount importance. And when they feel listened to, when they feel respected, when they feel like they have some input, design, build or not, owners will generally provide their own input into projects. And it's very, very important that we keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. It always goes back to like when you develop communication, right? They always talk about listening more than they talk about talking, and asking questions is a big part of active listening. And when you employ that strategy, you get a lot more out of the relationship than you would if you just kind of, oh, you need plans? Let me get to work. Move on.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and it's combining those two, right? The technical skills, which pretty much every engineer has, but then you combine that with I don't know, kind of like the service industry mindset where you're providing good service, and you're for the clients, they feel taken care of. They feel the trust is there, and they're easy to talk to. So something goes wrong, or if their problem comes up, they're not afraid to just pick up the phone and give you a chat or something like that. I think that's something I think as engineers, that becomes more and more crucial as the technology progresses and there's more automation in terms of the technical stuff. Having that people component, I think it's going to be crucial, especially now, but even going forward as in the engineering industry, just because it's a skill that I think is getting more and more lost as we progress in technology. But at the end of the day, business is people.
It is. And that's a really good point. As not just as technology advances, but as we advance on a culture, 50, 60, 70 years ago, when structural engineering was obviously still around, as it was 2,000 years ago, engineers were looked at as just this technical resource. And it was fine to be brash, to be, I want to say rude, but be extremely assertive in everything that you do. It just, if you wanted someone to hold your hand and make you feel good, well, you went to the sales team. But I think just in general with the culture, and I think that this is global. This isn't just in the United States. We talk with people over in Europe and a lot of other places as well, and they see this too. But I think especially here in the United States, it's more and more important to have those soft skills, to be approachable to people. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be that you don't have to go find an organization that does that. If you can, that's great. But as an individual, as a contributor engineer, you're going to find that your relationships flourish, that you're afforded more opportunities. Because don't think about it just as, well, I'm going to make this client feel good so that then they like my company. Other people are going to notice that. Those clients are going to come back. They're going to talk to your manager. They're going to talk to other people within your organization. And it's, hey, this engineer is doing a really great job. And they may not know why, right? Because if you got to make sure that a building doesn't fall over, people are going to run calculations a very similar way, right? That's what the PE exam teaches us, is that there is a defined set of rules, wind load, snow load, seismic calculations, everything else. There is a right and wrong answer. But when someone leaves a comment or leaves a review or calls a supervisor and says, hey, I really appreciate what Matthew or Alex did on this project, they may not articulate exactly, well, it's because they were a great communicator. And maybe it is. But when you have those soft skills and you have the communication capabilities to make someone feel heard and to take that relationship and communication to a next level, that's going to pay massive dividends. And then also internal within organizations, right? It doesn't have to just be external with client facing. If you have the ability to do that with clients, you're going to have the ability to do that with other members on your team, whether it be direct peers, subordinates, supervisors. Engineers can be leaders both up and down. And that's really is something important that I talk to with all the people that I mentor, from middle school to high school to college and other professionals in the industry, is that those internal relationships are just as important as the external ones. And it can be not just external up, but also external down, right? So treat your vendors, treat your partners the same way you treat the person sitting in the desk next to you, the same way you treat the clients. And that's how you elevate careers. That's how you elevate businesses. That's how you make a name for yourself in the industry. And then if you're going on doing those other things, you're in groups, you're in networking communities, you're in professional organizations, and you're doing those same things, then if your definition of success, and if your goal is to quote unquote be someone, that's the way you do that. You can certainly design a beautiful bridge or beautiful building and it wins design of the year. The people that do that, I'd probably rather buy a lottery ticket than to roll my dice on winning a building design of the year award. But what I do have control over is how I communicate with people and how I build relationships. And that is going to take you as an engineer, you to people on this conversation, and everyone listening. That's the piece of it that is really going to be able to accelerate your career and take you to the next level and open up opportunities where you could get into either other industries or just find other pieces of the career that you may not have previously thought about.
Yeah, I know we're running a little short on time, but I wanted to ask my last question here, just related to that. And then I think, Alex, you can ask your last
Please
question. Do you have any personal or practical advice for maybe a typical engineer that that hasn't been in or didn't know the importance of networking, and maybe they're shy or they're not used to public speaking? Do you have any practical advice to maybe improve the personal brand or improve those skills?
I do. So there's two things. So one is going to be something you can do personally, and two is something you can do outside of yourself. So outside of yourself, go look up and go find a local chapter of Toastmasters. Toastmasters is a global speaking program, a global public speaking program that teaches both public speaking, but it also teaches leadership. You don't have to do it forever. You can do it as short or as long as you want. I would highly recommend getting through at least the first book, which is called Competent Communicator. It's a series of 10 very structured speeches that you present. But the cool thing about it is you're presenting these speeches to a group of people that over time you become very comfortable with. So the first meeting is terrifying, the first speech is terrifying, but the second time you get up there, you're giving a speech and it's terrifying because it's public speaking, and we don't do that well as, well, generally humans, but you start to feel more comfortable with it. And then the next time you're in a public setting, hey, well, I can publicly speak, and you don't necessarily always relate it to just the people that you're comfortable with, but that is a really great program. You can take that rabbit hole super, super deep on a number of speeches. There's competition to it. There's all different kinds of speaking modules. If you find yourself a serious technical speaker or one that's more humorous, there's all kinds of different ways you can explore that. But a fantastic, fantastic program. There are chapters all over. Toastmasters International, highly recommend. There's small chapters, there's large, and everything in between. The second piece of that is more of an internal reflection, is figure out your personal brand, right? And find out what makes you as an engineer, what makes you as a human, an individual, different than anybody else. And it can be a passion, it can be a hobby, it can be a little quirk even, but find a way to tie that into how you can be relatable to other people, find a way to tie that into the work that you do. And if you can tie in your personal passion into your work, then that's going to make you open up, because then you feel more a part of it, right? We don't always get to feel a part of, well, I'm just another engineer for a massive corporation. I'm working on this project and no one's going to know me. But if you can have a personal tie into it because you've done a deep dive on yourself and you know what makes you tick, then you're going to be more confident talking to people. You're going to find ways to be relatable to other people, and you're going to find ways to tie that into your work passion that makes you take a little bit more pride in that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, oftentimes when you feel trapped or you feel like you're pigeonholed, it's really just yourself that's doing that. Like, you're just focused on what you got to get done. Engineers get really, really busy, right? So we get bottlenecked and we go, okay, we just got to get this deadline out. And then you get trapped in a year or two of, oh, I'm getting the deadline out, getting the next deadline out. And if you don't ever take a breath and look around, it's pretty easy to lose your passion. And once you lose your passion, it's really hard to communicate. It's really hard for people to want to work with you because you're not actively happy, and happy people do better work and they communicate better.
Well said.
Thank you. So love what you said. I got one final question. We might have covered it already. I know you said ask questions earlier, but what is one final piece of advice you'd like to share with engineers who want to take on more leadership responsibility and to deliver a greater value in their roles?
Don't be afraid. So it's interesting you talk about asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask for more. Again, talking about getting pigeonholed within an organization, within a project, within a specific project type. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want. If you want an opportunity to be customer facing, or if you want an opportunity to work on a different project or work in a different division, just go ask for it. And the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen to you is your boss can say no. And that's really it. That happened to me early in my career. I asked, my boss said no. I found somebody else who would say yes. I'm not telling everyone to go run for the hills and leave the organization. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I'm trying to say is, we talked a lot about personal gratification. We talked about feeling comfortable within ourselves. Again, we have to take care of ourselves first. It's the put your mask on before helping others in an airplane situation, right? If we don't take care of ourselves personally, professionally, emotionally, spiritually, and everything in between, we can't help others. We just can't. That's the long and the short of it. So if you want to explore other things, whether it be, I want to do some continuing education, I want to join some networking group, I want to be part of a professional organization, I want to be a part of the next design review meeting with the customer, even if it's just to sit as a fly on the wall and be part of that meeting to see how other engineers, other constituents in the organization interact and react to conversations with other people. Yeah, but it really boils back down to that. It's if you think something is interesting, just ask for it, ask questions about it, and be a lifelong learner. That's kind of the little bonus aspect is always be learning. And it's outside of the 15 hours of continuing education. That doesn't count. That's a requirement to have that PE stamp. I don't give you credit for that. But it's learning about other things, learning about other people. And like I said, the world is changing fast. Matthew, you said it. Technology, AI, automation, all this stuff, and it's only changing faster, more quickly, if that makes sense. So being a lifelong learner, and best of luck to everybody. And it's a big world, but it's a small place too. So don't be afraid to ask for help, and we're all in it together.
Yeah.
I love it. And you said with great power comes great responsibility. I think with great change comes great opportunity.
Hey, there you go. That's a good one too. We'll have to get that one in the next Spider-Man. Maybe they'll quote you on that one.
There'll be another one. There's always is. Thanks so much, Daniel. Yeah, thanks for the great advice.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We would love to hear your feedback, comments, or questions. To leave them, please visit structuralengineeringchannel.com. There you will find a summary of key points as well as the links to any of the resources or websites mentioned during the episode. Don't forget to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And until next time, we wish you the best in all your structural engineering endeavors.